We think of the internet as like its own world, right, with its own rules. But things get really interesting when those lines get blurry. And what you do online, even anonymously, can have real-world consequences in, like, your career.
It's a really interesting area. And today we're looking at a situation that played out during the super high-stakes medical residency application process, something we can really only describe as professional catfishing.
Wild, right?
Hmm.
One of our listeners sent us this article, and it outlines a really unusual scenario. We're going to, do a deep dive into this incident. We'll break down how it all started, how they found out about the deception, and what the motivations might have been behind it all. And, we'll talk about the big lessons we can all learn from this, whether you're in medicine or any other professional field.
Yeah, because, nowadays everything is online.
Okay, let's jump in. This whole thing started with an email. It showed up just 9 days before the deadline to certify those residency match rank lists.
9 days. Wow, that is cutting it close. So much pressure for both the applicants and the programs. And who did this email go to?
It went to some key players: the program leadership, the chief residents, and the program coordinator.
Okay, so everyone involved.
Exactly. And this wasn't just like a normal question or something. The person who sent it pretended to be a third-year medical student from another medical school in the same state. They said they were interested in doing a visiting rotation at the program, but there was something off about the tone right from the start.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was pretty disrespectful. They even straight up said that one of the inpatient services at the hospital was dysfunctional. That kind of negativity, especially coming from a potential student, would definitely raise some eyebrows.
You're telling me that's not the first impression you want to make.
Exactly. And despite the program trying to talk to the student, to understand their concerns, the person refused to do a video call.
Avoiding a face-to-face, that's a big red flag right there.
Right. You got to wonder what they're hiding. So that's when things got really interesting.
I bet. What happened next?
Well, since this whole thing was so sketchy, the program wanted to make sure this student was even real. Makes sense, right? So the assistant dean got in touch with the dean of the medical school the student said they were from.
Oh, to double check.
Yep. And surprise, surprise, there was no record of any student with that name ever being at that school. It was a fake identity.
Wow. They really went through the trouble of creating this whole persona.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. But the story doesn't end there. The program's residents, like the chief residents and senior residents, they took it upon themselves to do some digging.
Oh, interesting. They became internet sleuths.
Right. They took the email address from that initial shady email and did a search online. And guess what? They only got one single result.
Really? Just one out of the whole internet?
Yep, just one. It was a post on this anonymous online forum for medical trainees. And it wasn't a new account either. It had posts going back like 10 years.
Wow, a digital trail a mile long.
Pretty much. And what's crazy? One of those older posts was about selling textbooks. And guess what they included?
Let me guess, another email address.
Bingo. And this second email had the same last name as someone who was actually applying to their residency program. It all started to click.
No way. Talk about a coincidence, or maybe not.
So then they started looking at social media profiles, even like testimonials on wedding planner websites, anything public.
Trying to connect the dots.
Yeah. And they found pictures and confirmed that this applicant and the person from that old email, they were siblings.
It's like they left a trail of digital breadcrumbs.
It's unbelievable, right? And this wasn't just some random applicant. This person had actually done a rotation at their hospital before, been mentored by one of their faculty, and was ranked pretty highly on their list.
Someone they were seriously considering.
Yeah, it's wild. And then the research mentor who had worked with this applicant before, they decided to send them a casual text just to check in, as the application process was wrapping up.
Just to see how things were going.
Exactly. And the way the applicant responded in that text, it was almost word for word the same as that original email.
The one from the fake persona.
Yeah, it was like the same person was writing both.
So they had their confirmation.
Yep. And with that, the program decided to remove the student from their rank list just 5 days before it had to be finalized.
Wow, that's a huge decision.
Definitely. And it's important to note, it wasn't just because of the negative things the applicant said about the program. It was the lying, the whole deceitful way they went about it. That's what really mattered.
Right, the dishonesty. It brings up a bigger issue, like what does catfishing even mean in a professional setting?
Yeah, good point. We usually think about catfishing in, like, the online dating world, right?
Right.
Well, according to Merriam-Webster, catfishing is when someone sets up a false personal profile on a social networking site for fraudulent or deceptive purposes.
So it's not just about romance. This medical student created a fake online persona to mess with a professional program.
Yeah, which is just not okay. And the program actually said that they would have been totally fine with the applicant asking tough questions or raising concerns as long as they were honest about who they were.
It was the lying, the hiding that crossed the line.
Exactly. And this whole thing, even though it's about medical residency, makes you think about professionalism online in general.
Yeah.
Like what's acceptable and what's not.
It's a big deal. It's what people call unprofessionalism.
Right. And even though there isn't a ton of research yet on how online behavior affects medical careers, there's enough to know that it can be a problem. What exactly does unprofessionalism include?
It's not just negativity. There's a scoping review mentioned in the article that highlights a few main risks. One is that people feel less accountable for what they do online because they think there won't be real-world consequences.
Like they can just hide behind a screen name.
Exactly. Another risk is blurring the lines between your personal and professional lives online. And, of course, there's the obvious one, being unprofessional online, like bad-mouthing your workplace or colleagues.
Makes sense. And this whole catfishing thing, that fits right in there with not being professional and honest.
Totally. And the crazy thing is, there's not much research on catfishing outside of dating. So this case, while it's definitely out there, might just be the tip of the iceberg.
It's a little scary to think about. There's even another example mentioned in the article, a really extreme one. Someone pretended to be an applicant and emailed a residency program asking to withdraw their application.
Seriously, what happened?
Well, the real applicant ended up losing their spot, and the person who sent the fake email got into legal trouble.
That's insane. It just goes to show that online deception can have serious consequences.
Yeah. So we know what happened, but what made this person do it in the first place? Why catfish a residency program?
It's the big question, isn't it? The article suggests a few possibilities. Some younger people might think it's funny, like a prank, even though it's obviously not.
Right. And some people try to create this perfect version of themselves online. But in this case, the fake persona was actually more critical and unpleasant than the real person.
You would think they would try to make themselves look better, not worse.
I know, right? It's like they completely missed the mark. The article also briefly mentions cases where people pretend to be a different race or ethnicity online, which is a whole other ethical mess.
It's complicated, but one thing's for sure. No matter the reason, catfishing is all about dishonesty.
Which can have huge consequences for medical professionals. They could lose job opportunities, face legal issues, or even have their medical license taken away. In this case, it was the lying, more than the criticism itself, that led to the program kicking the applicant out.
It was a breach of trust, plain and simple.
So, what can we learn from all of this? The article gives some great advice for different groups.
Like what?
Well, for medical students, it's a reminder that you're not as anonymous online as you think you are. Everything you do leaves a trace. And residency programs care about professionalism and honesty, so be upfront and don't try to hide who you are.
Good advice. What about medical schools? What can they do?
The article says they should teach students more about social media and how to behave professionally online. They should use real-world examples of people messing up, to show students what not to do.
I like that. Learn from others' mistakes.
Yeah, and they should coach students who feel awkward about asking tough questions directly so they don't resort to sneaky tactics. Like, medical schools could have workshops where students work through these ethical dilemmas online before they face them in real life with real stakes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Prepare them for the real world. What about the programs themselves?
For residency program leaders, the article says they need to be savvy about spotting these e-breadcrumbs, those digital clues that applicants leave behind. They also say that programs can have their own opinions, but they should be upfront about those opinions and not try to manipulate applicants through deception.
Basically, play fair.
Exactly. And there's one more important point for everyone involved. The authors recognize that there's a power imbalance between applicants and programs. They say it's good for programs to have ways for applicants to give anonymous feedback, to share concerns without fear. That sounds fair.
But they make it very clear that lying directly to program leaders is unacceptable. It crosses a line. What this case really highlights is that in today's world, your online activity is your professional reputation. If you try to hide who you are or what you've done, it shows you lack the qualities that programs are looking for.
So to wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that even though the internet can feel like a separate world, what you do online has real-world consequences, especially when it comes to something as important as applying for medical residency.
It's about being professional and honest.
It is. It's okay to ask hard questions and raise concerns, but you have to do it in a way that's honest and respectful.
So for you, our listener, here's something to think about. How do you balance wanting privacy online with being professional? What are the ethics of being anonymous in different professional settings? It's something to consider as you navigate your own online life and your career.